thanks all of you for giving up your time to come and listen to me speak. I think I recognise a couple of names potentially from other events. I'm going to do a little bit of background to who I am, apologise to those of you who have heard this a few times on YouTube before. I'll try and keep it brief for any of you who follow my YouTube channel. But so I'm Chrissie Wolfe. I am a solicitor at Irwin Mitchell in the International Personal Injury team, and I'll talk a little bit about what I do in a second, but I'm going to do a kind of mini chronology of how I got here, because I kind of have quite an unconventional route to law, actually. So I started off by being home educated. So I was home educated up until I was a teenager by my mum, because we were kind of moving between the UK and the US because my dad's American and my mum didn't want to keep pulling me in and out of school. So she decided to home educate me to kind of minimize educational disruption. So I stayed at home, was home taught until I was a teenager. And then I went to secondary school to do my GCSEs, which was fine. GCSEs were fine, got to A-levels and just had a complete nosedive, basically. Really didn't get anywhere near my predicted grade. So I was predicted ABB, ended up getting C, D, D, E in biology, chemistry, physics and maths. So not a great start at all to a potential career in law, but it wasn't actually my intention to be a lawyer at that stage. I really wanted to be a vet. We had loads of animals at home and I just was obsessed and I really wanted to be a vet. But my hopes of being a vet kind of shattered with those grades as well, because you need really, really good grades to get into vet school. So I'd known that before, even with ABB, that I wasn't going to get into vet school. So my plan had been to do an animal biology degree and then convert to veterinary later on, which you can do after if you've got a kind of base biology degree. So I had a conditional offer from Birmingham Uni to study animal biology, but obviously my required grades for that were ABB, which I got nowhere near ABB, and I was devastated because I had my heart set on going to Birmingham. When I went to visit it, I just loved the campus. Really just liked everything about the course, and I had a couple of friends who were going and I just had my heart set on it and I really wouldn't take no for an answer. There were a couple of courses that I had as backup courses on my UCAS form in case I didn't make the grades, and I would have still got into those courses, but I just really didn't want to. So I basically just phoned up the university and phoned up admissions and phoned up various different science departments who all said, no, tough, you can't get in with those grades. We don't have your grades at Birmingham. And then eventually I got through to a kind of a really sympathetic person in the science department. And he said, well, actually what you can do is you could do an access course. I mean, your only options really are to resit your A-levels, get a better grade and come back to us next year if that's what you want to do, or you can do this access course, basically a foundation course, which is kind of a foundation year basically. And if you get a first in this foundation year, we will then allow you to basically re-enter your original course at first year. So that's what I did. Unfortunately, they did not have a foundation course in biology, which would have been my first choice. They only had a foundation course in chemistry, which was my worst nightmare because I hated chemistry and I had to get a first in order to transfer back onto my original course. But nevertheless, I did. So I did my foundation chemistry course and I did get a first. And then I transferred onto my animal biology course. So I was essentially at uni for 4 years because I had to do the extra year, but then graduated with a 2-1. But towards the end of my towards the sort of middle of my final year, I decided that I didn't really want to go on and do vet school because vet school was going to be another 4 or 5 years on top of my animal biology degree, because it's either a 6 or 7 year course in total, depending on where you go to study. And I just didn't really fancy doing that off the back of 4 years of uni, which I'd already done. So I kind of had a bit of a crisis in terms of what am I going to do with my life. I'd always planned to be on this veterinary route and now I don't want to do that. So I went to see my careers advisor at uni, who basically kind of got out the pie chart of what people do with my degree. And the first thing was teaching, didn't want to do that. The second thing was research. Also didn't really want to do that, didn't really picture myself in a white coat. And then funnily enough, the third thing that people went into with my degree was law, which had never crossed my mind before that point, because I'd always thought law was very kind of corporate. And, I just pictured kind of lots of paperwork, long hours, offices, behind closed doors, not really for me. I was kind of more of a kind of practical person. I just didn't really see that kind of career being for me. So I didn't really understand why people with a science degree would go into that. And then I started looking into it, and he said particularly routes that people do with science degrees were either intellectual property, so things like patents, or the other route, which is kind of injury and medical law. And I kind of looked into both of them, and I actually did a little bit of work experience in in IP, in an IP firm. And didn't really like it and decided I wasn't really going to go down that route. But then started looking into the medical side and decided that I thought this was something that would really interest me when I started looking at what actual medical lawyers do and negligence lawyers and how scientific it is. And actually, like, you spend so much time reading medical reports and medical records and speaking to doctors and speaking to medical experts. And this sounded a lot more up my street than kind of contracts and corporate and things like that, when I didn't even really know that this sort of law existed. So that's kind of why I decided to kind of look down the personal injury route. But then I started looking into how you get into law. And I obviously got met with how incredibly competitive it is, and also how important your A-level grades are when you're going into a career in law. So it was kind of like, I went right back to the beginning. I thought I was over it. I thought I'd done my access course. I could leave my A-levels in the past. And then I got hit with this, no, you're still going to have to do this. You're still going to have to go through this again when you want to apply for training contracts. So that was a bit disheartening, to say the least, and there were quite a few tears about that at the time, because I got my heart set on doing this now. I was actually really excited about it. So I started applying in my final year of uni, but I just got nowhere. I just got straight rejections from everywhere. I didn't even get past the application stage anywhere. And then I enrolled on my GDL that following September after I'd finished my degree. Did a load of work experience over that summer, pretty much back-to-back work experience, which I got by just writing random letters to loads and loads of local law firms and businesses who I didn't know, but just to try and build up my work experience side of my CV, because obviously I didn't have the academic side. I had my 2-1, but I didn't have great A-levels, which was obviously going to be a limiting factor. So I kind of took the route that, okay, I'm going to build up all of the other things which are important for a career in law, because there's nothing I can do about my academics. So I just got work experience from loads of different places. Actually, a couple of people responded to my letters. Like, I sent about 30, and I think I got like 2 or 3 responses. But once I actually went on those placements, I got offered other opportunities from people that I was introduced to during those weeks. So I ended up doing like 8 or 9 weeks, I think, of work experience over that summer. So got huge amounts of work experience on my CV, which was brilliant. And then went into my GDL year infinitely stronger from a CV point of view. I already identified that I really wanted to work for Irwin Mitchell, actually, because they were the top firm for doing kind of personal injury and medical law. And I just liked the culture. I'd done a few events with them. I'd met a few people from Irwin Mitchell, and just thought, this is really where I want to go for sure. So I only applied to a few places, I think 2 or 3 places in my GDL year, Irwin Mitchell and a couple of others. And I got my applications in really early, and thankfully did get through the process with Irwin Mitchell and got offered my training contract just after I finished my GDL. And then started my training contract a year and a half later, because they were recruiting 2 years in advance. So I took a year out and went traveling during that year, did a whole load of different things, and then started my training contracts. Is quite a while ago now, back in 2013. So did my 2-year training contracts, qualified in 2015, and then kind of started my mentoring journey round about then, because I really wanted to kind of help other people who were struggling for various reasons, because law is super competitive and there are so many things that you need on your CV, and so many things that a lot of people probably feel like they're weaker in. It could be academics, or it could be cultural reasons, it could be socioeconomic reasons, it could be lack of work experience. So there are so many things that you need that I really wanted to try and help people who were struggling for any reason to kind of get through the process. So I was doing a lot of one-to-one mentoring. I think I had 4 or 5 mentees at one point through various different schemes. And I really wanted to do more mentoring, but I just couldn't, there weren't enough hours in the day to balance with my training contract and to kind of give the mentees the time that I thought they deserved. So I kind of combined this with a friend of mine who was a pro YouTuber and had been trying to get me onto YouTube for ages, not to do law related stuff, but to do, beauty and events and things like that, which I never really fancied doing. But I kind of watched her platform and I saw that she had this, she had something like 30,000 subscribers at the time. And I kind of saw these people watching her, and kind of, she did things, she was actually a Disney vlogger, but she also did things like, oh, this is, what I got in my handbag and all this stuff that I could never picture doing. But she did it so well, and she had this captive audience of people. And I thought, I wonder if I could merge these two things together and maybe kind of use YouTube as a kind of online mentoring kind of a platform. So I just started to shoot some videos, and uploaded my first one in, I think it was, September 2017, uploaded my first one, and didn't really get a huge amount of traction at the beginning, but eventually it kind of grew, and I was just doing careers advice type stuff, application strategy, how to get work experience, what is commercial awareness, and how do you demonstrate it on application forms, just kind of hopefully helpful practical skills that a lot of students, particularly those who don't have the kind of benefit of going to a top university, perhaps they don't have that kind of support and a kind of anyone to kind of walk them through the process, because the training contract application process is kind of a bit of a game really that you have to kind of learn how to play. And if you don't have that training, then it can be very difficult, almost impossible to get through the process. So I kind of took what I learned from University of Law and kind of put that onto YouTube really, so that other people had the benefit of that. And slow going at first, and then eventually it started to pick up. Legal Cheek actually published it in one of their stories, and then I got quite a lot of subscribers, and now we're 3 years down the line, just over 3 years down the line, and I've got just under 7,000 subscribers, which is good. I'm pleased with that. I mean, we're not breaking any records, but it's a niche industry, and I'm pleased. And if that means that that's 7,000 of you who are getting some benefit from what I'm saying, then that's more than I could ever have hoped to do from one-on-one mentoring. So from my point of view, as long as it's helping a handful of people, it doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands, then it's worth doing. And then that kind of morphed into events, and I now do online Instagram interviews, although they've temporarily moved onto Zoom, weekly interviews with people in the profession, and I've done all sorts of stuff on there. So that's kind of my side hustle, Law and Broader. And as part of my day job, basically what I do is, I said I'd talk about this. It's basically, it's a little bit like a glorified Sunsea and A&E. Actually, if you've ever watched that, it's a lot of people going on holiday and getting themselves into strife. You'd be amazed at the sorts of things that what happens to people on holiday, particularly when they've had a bit too much sun. So I've kind of moved a little bit away from the holiday accident side of things now, actually. And I have a real niche, which is cosmetic surgery claims. So people who've gone abroad for cosmetic surgery and have had horrific results. So all of my cases involve people who've been injured abroad or foreigners who've been injured here. So my speciality is EU law and conflict of law, basically, if any of you are doing EU law. Not something I intended to do because I wasn't a big fan of EU law, but now here I am doing it. So that's kind of the bulk of what I do, and I do that in a kind of injury context, basically. So I deal with all catastrophic injuries. So all of my claims are worth over £100,000. So people are quite significantly injured when they come to me, sadly. And I mainly do cosmetic surgery now, but I also have done in the past holiday accidents, as I mentioned, extreme sports accidents like skiing, jet skiing, snowboarding, military claims. So people who've been stationed abroad and been injured. So all sorts of things, really. Road traffic accidents. I'm trying to think of anything else that I've done that's weird and wonderful. I've got a friend who's done some shark attacks. One of my colleagues in my team. Our team actually handled the Tunisia terrorist attacks as well. So really, really wide variety of types of claim that come into the international injury department. So I really enjoy how varied it is, and how different everything that comes onto my desk is. So I've done all sorts of things that I never thought I would do going into injury law, but I really enjoy it, and every day is different. I mean, less so at the moment because of remote working, and it's not quite as varied as it used to be. There used to be a lot of visiting clients and a lot of going to court, but obviously everything's happening remotely at the moment, so everything's pretty much done from home. But on a normal day, I'd be traveling around all over the place. I've done a bit of abroad travel, actually. I normally go abroad at least once or twice a year to visit clients or go to a trial or do something to do with a case that's being brought in a foreign court. So I do get a little bit of travel, which you don't normally with personal injury law, so that's a bit of a bonus. And that's kind of a little bit about my day job. Welcome to ask any questions about that or anything about my journey that you want to. I'll stop talking now because I've been talking for quite a while.
That's all right.
I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you, Chrissie. Yeah, that was a great summary of your life so far. I'm sure, hopefully, a lot of that was familiar with some of our students here today. So just before we do head over to the prepared questions that we've got for you, just so you can get to learn a bit about some of the viewers today, we've actually set up a poll, so fingers crossed that's going to work. Okay. So I'll launch that now. And basically the point is you can find out what year of study these students are in. so we can kind of focus the questions based on that. So as we expected, there's a large majority there, first years.
Okay.
Perfect. There's a few more who haven't voted, so I'll give them a moment, but it's always interesting to see who's coming along to these careers events. All right, I think I've given them long enough now, so I'll end that poll and share the results. So yeah, you should be able to see on screen, that's the attendance we've got today. So I think with that in mind, Kevin, did you want to kick off the questions for Chrissie?
Yep, can do.
Perfect.
Thanks, Tom.
No worries.
Hi, Chrissie. Yeah, we've just created a list of questions. Some of them have been sent in from the students who are attending the session today. So the first question we have is all about firm selection. So as you can imagine, there are hundreds of firms out there, and for students to apply to, and you often get a headache trying to select the right firm for you. So what factors should students take into consideration when selecting a law firm, and why did you choose Irvine Mitchell? Obviously, you spoke a little bit about your interest in personal injury, but what are the other factors you have to take into consideration?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely tricky trying to identify where you want to apply, particularly what type of law you're interested in. I think the first step is to identify what sector you think is interesting to you. And that can sometimes be quite different to the academic subjects you enjoy, which makes it even more difficult sometimes, because the subject that you enjoy studying at uni may not necessarily translate to a type of law that you actually enjoy practicing in. So even if you're in first year, the best thing you can do is try and get some work experience in different areas of law that you think might interest you, but actually within a law firm. A lot of law firms are now doing virtual internships as well, because I know that obviously physical work experience is lacking at the moment and probably won't come back in until next year. But if there's an area of law that you think you might be interested in, then the best thing you can do is try and get some practical experience of what that's like actually in practice, rather than just kind of relying on the academic side to make a choice about what might be interesting to you. And then I think you need to decide what sort of work-life balance you want, because that dictates sort of what size of firm you want to work in. Because generally the bigger firms, yes, they will pay you bigger salaries, but also you'll be expected to work quite long hours within those bigger businesses. So you can kind of take a view on what size of business and what type of business you want to work in based on, I suppose, what type of salary you'd ideally like, but that's got to balance with what kind of work-life balance you'd like, because the bigger the salary, the less work-life balance. So you can kind of take a view then as to whether you think you're going to be within sort of the larger corporate and commercial firms, the city firms potentially, which are going to have longer hours and less work-life balance, or whether you want to work in a more kind of mid-sized or perhaps smaller firm, or you don't want to work in a law firm at all. Perhaps you want to work in-house, or you want to work in the public sector. Or there are lots of different options. It's not just limited to law firms and types of law firms, which I know makes it even more difficult because there's even more choice. But actually, some of those businesses which are not strictly law firms are more accessible and they're easier to get work experience in. So it doesn't hurt to kind of do a bit of a mixture, get some experience inside a law firm, but also get some experience outside of a law firm and in other legal businesses to see if maybe that's more suited to you. Again, because generally the non-law firms have a slightly better work-life balance as well. So public sector and in-house teams or alternative legal service providers tend to have a better work-life balance. So it depends what you want to do really, and kind of what sort of person you are, whether you're quite prepared to work very, very long hours in return for a big salary, or whether you'd rather pitch yourself with a bit more of a balance. So I think that can kind of at least narrow down the sort of genre of business that you're applying to. And then within those, then you need to start looking at kind of the firm's values, the firm's culture, the kind of ethos of the firm. You can start off by doing internet research to find out whether this broadly looks like the sort of thing you'd be interested in. And you can get a vibe from a website actually as to whether you think it's somewhere that you might fit. You can kind of look at the other people that work there. You can look at the sort of sectors that they practice in, and do you support those sectors? Do you identify with that? What are their core values? Do those resonate with you? And then kind of once you've narrowed that pool down a little bit further, then the best thing to do is go to some sort of law fair or online event. At the moment, everything's online, but they're just as good, actually, the online law fairs really, as the physical ones in terms of actually being able to speak directly to recruiters. And really, that's kind of your point where you might you know, you might really narrow your focus, because I'd recommend applying to no more than maybe 6 or 8 firms realistically for training contracts or vacation scheme placements, because of how much work is required to actually get through the process. You'll find that you don't have any more time than that, because your application quality will diminish the more you do. So actually, if you want to stand a chance of getting through the process, I wouldn't do any more than 6 to 8. So really kind of your law fair or your online event where you get to meet the recruiter face to face, in inverted commas, should kind of be the last stage in your process, where maybe you've got 10 or 12 from doing your online research, and then you want to narrow that down to kind of your final 6 or 8 to apply to, because that's an opportunity where you actually get to speak to recruiters and potentially trainees and employees about what it's really like, and you get to ask questions that aren't published online, and that's kind of how you get to your kind of final selection, I think. So that's kind of the process. I mean, I had a slightly different process because I was fairly set on what I wanted to do kind of coming out of uni. I knew that I wanted to do the kind of personal injury medical law side. And then I looked within that for the best firms that were doing that. And obviously Owen Mitchell kind of came up top of the list. And another thing to bear in mind as well is obviously what their criteria are and making sure that you fit with that. I think this might be a question that's coming up a bit later on, but I can touch on it now, in terms of making sure that you're applying to firms which fit with the skill set and the kind of credentials that you have. So I only applied to firms which didn't have an A-level requirement, because obviously I had terrible A-levels. So I was quite limited in where I could apply, which in a way helped me narrow down where I was applying to, because I just couldn't apply to a huge amount of firms because of my grade restrictions. So that's another thing to kind of help you narrow your targets, are to make sure that you are only applying to places where you fit the criteria. Because if you don't fit the criteria, the chances of you getting through are super slim, just because law is really, really competitive. And these firms have literally thousands. I think they had 3,500 applications for 40 places the year that I applied. I'm not sure what it's like now, but that's the sort of figures you're dealing with. So if you don't fit the criteria, it's almost impossible for you to get through the process, because they've got literally thousands of people that do. So definitely always be selective and make sure that you're not just kind of beating your head against a brick wall in terms of trying to get through a gateway which just isn't open for you. That's kind of my biggest piece of advice, I think. Again, I've rambled on, so.
No, those are some great points. Yeah, hopefully those points will help narrow the list of firms down for the applicants as well. Thank you, Chrissie. Yeah, over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, no, you've obviously touched on it a bit there, but we're interested to know, once you've selected a firm, how do you go about researching effectively and kind of demonstrate that in applications? Because obviously it's very tempting for students to kind of copy and paste, you know, nuggets of information off the website. So how do you really go about standing out from the rest of the crowd?
Yeah, so I think definitely internet research is kind of your first port of call to see what the firm's like and what's going on. And a lot of firms are quite active on their websites about posting cases, and also kind of deals that they're doing and what's going on within the firm. But also their social media profiles are hugely helpful, because you will find those update daily with several tweets or several posts. So you get the most up-to-date information from social media. So I would, once you've done your internet research and you think this might be one that you're interested in, I would then follow them immediately on Twitter, LinkedIn, or if they're on Instagram, or, you know, any of their social media platforms, or if they offer a service where you can subscribe for weekly updates or emails or something like that, make sure you do that, so that you're really getting kind of all the maximum information. You can set up Google alerts as well for firms that you're interested in. So you can put, you can set up, you know, let's say you were interested in Owen Mitchell, you could put Owen Mitchell as a Google alert for news. Then anytime something was released in the news that was to do with Owen Mitchell, you would then get that sent straight to you as an email. So all of that stuff really helps you to keep bang up to date with all of the information. And actually candidates which really stand out often in application forms or interviews are those who really picked up on something that literally happened that day or within the last couple of days, rather than just, oh, I saw that you ran this case a few years ago about this. You know, if someone picks up on something that's literally hot off the press, that really shows that you are really monitoring what they're doing and you're really interested in what's going on. So that's kind of one way. And I think another way is sort of picking something, you know, it could be from the website, or it could be something that you've seen an employee say at an event or something like that. I think go to as many events as you possibly can. A lot of firms are running things like podcasts at the moment or webinars. Sign up for those as well, because you never know what you might hear in those webinars or in those sessions, which are kind of real nuggets of information that no one else is going to have because they haven't taken that initiative. Even if those webinars or podcasts aren't specifically aimed at students, even if they're aimed at clients or work referrers, go to them anyway, because you can actually put them on, even if it's in the background while you're doing something else. You might just pick up a little bit of information which you can note down and then put in your application later on. And again, that really shows that you're going the extra mile in terms of you're not just going to the website and then picking the most obvious thing. You're really kind of exploring everything they're doing across all their platforms and paying attention. Other examples of things I've seen people do really well of when they've taken a case study and they've actually kind of explained with relevance why they're so interested in that case study. For example, I think someone picked out a case once, it was a cerebral palsy case. And I mean, obviously you're limited in terms of whether you can actually apply it to a personal situation, but she had, I think it was a sibling who had cerebral palsy, and she kind of really drew a parallel about it, and it showed why she was so passionate about going into this area of law and why she was so passionate about working for IM, because she had a personal experience that story really, and it really resonated with her, and it made her more passionate about wanting to pursue that area of law. So I think if you can really tailor something, as rather than just saying I'm interested in this story because it was in the news and it's interesting, if you can really kind of bring it to life a little bit more about why it's so interesting to you, why in particular did you have an affinity for that story or that issue, I think that can really help, rather than just kind of listing bullet point things. I mean, you don't need to tell us what's on our website. We can see it, we put it there. So if you're going to talk about something on the website, you need to bring it to life and explain why it's important to you rather than just listing it. So I think that's a good way that you can stand out as well. I mean, I've kind of tied two questions together there, I think, but there are lots of different ways to get information about firms, especially now that everything's gone so digital and online. So many businesses have embraced the online world and are producing so much content about what they're doing. So there are loads and loads of places to get info. And I still think the best things are events or law fairs where you can actually speak to people one-on-one and ask questions that aren't on the internet and that no one else is going to know the answer to, because you've gone the extra mile to ask that question. So I think prepare good questions if you're going to meet recruiters or employees in person, online, to make sure you're getting the most out of that experience and you're not just asking questions where you could Google the answer, because then you're not getting the most out of it.
Thanks, Chrissie. I think Kevin has the next question.
Yeah, so there's a common question that students often get asked at universities, what sort of lawyer they want to become or what area of law they're interested in. And as you can imagine, it's quite challenging at that early stage to develop that interest. So you spoke a little bit about how you developed your interest in personal injury. So what would you say is the best way students can learn more about sectors and specialisms, especially now when, the best way to get an idea of these areas is work experience. But now, as you can imagine, you can't get work experience anywhere that easily. So how can students learn more about, sectors and specialisms?
Yeah, well, I think the first place to start in terms of thinking about what sector and specialism you might be interested is to kind of go back to your roots and think about why you wanted to do law in the first place, because there must be a reason why you enrolled on this course. There must have been an inspiration somewhere, whether it's a family member or a TV show or an injustice in the world that drove you. There was a reason why you chose to do this course, and that is the starting point for choosing your sector, is kind of going back to what your passion was, what made you do this, and then kind of starting from there, and to look within, what surrounds that, and to see whether that gives you an indication of what kind of sector you might like to do. If it was, a human rights issue, for example, then maybe that's a good place to start with looking into it. Or perhaps if it's, a TV drama, maybe not the best inspiration because it's not that realistic in real life. But if you really enjoy, watching people in the courtroom, then maybe you want to go towards something that's very court-based, like litigation, or perhaps look into being a barrister, if that's what inspired you. So definitely kind of going back to what made you want to do law in the first place is a good starting point to start exploring what kind of sectors you'd be interested in, because you have to do something that you're passionate about. It's a long, hard career, and there's a lot of long hours and there's a lot of paperwork, and you have to love what you do. So the starting point is always finding what you're passionate about. And if you're not sure what type of law you're passionate about doing, then what are you passionate about in life? You know, do you love music? Do you love sport? Do you love fashion? Because there's a law for that, actually. And if you're for literally everything, so if you're passionate about another hobby, for example, then actually look into what it's like to be a lawyer within that area. I've got a friend who, he started off at Gowling, actually, and then he moved to a kind of a more boutique sports law firm, and now he runs his own firm, which is a boutique. He represents boxers, and he's an international boxer, and he's literally ringside every single boxing match, and he's there like checking the wraps and so, and he's just in his element because he's loved boxing since he was a kid, and now he's a boxing lawyer who, you know, runs his own firm. So it's a really good starting point to kind of think about what you're passionate about and then explore those areas. And it is difficult at the moment. I mean, as I mentioned, there are virtual internships which are going on at the moment, but those tend to be more for the corporate and commercial firms that are doing those at the moment. But when things start returning to normal, there will be opportunities for you to do work experience, either paid or unpaid work experience opportunities. There's also an organisation called Flex, which I always recommend, which is F-Lex on demand, which kind of offer short-term paralegal positions for people. So even if it's sometimes only a few days or a few weeks or a few months, but she's got thousands of different businesses and firms on her database. So she has got opportunities coming up all the time. That does tend to be a little bit further down the process because she tends to need people who have completed their LPC, but it is an option to look into once you're a little bit further down. But in the short term, I mean, there's so much information on the internet. If you put into YouTube sports lawyer or fashion lawyer, there will be videos about what that's like or people that have done it. So actually it's worthwhile exploring what's available online at the moment because there's a plethora of information online. So there are ways of finding out what these kind of jobs are like, and also connect with people on LinkedIn as well. You know, quite often you'll find people, you know, busy lawyers, they don't always respond. But actually, you know, what I did, I sent out 30 letters and I got 2 back. And off the back of that, I got 10 placements. So actually, you only need 1 or 2 people to respond to give you the information that you need. So it's worthwhile just approaching people. I'll tell you now, you'll get a lot of people who don't respond. But it's worthwhile if you're really interested in a particular area of law and you find someone on LinkedIn who is a lawyer in that area, it's worthwhile just sending them a message and just saying who you are. Look, nothing too long. Don't be sending essays about your life story because I guarantee they will not respond. But just, you know, I'm a law student, really keen to know a little bit about this area of law. Can you just tell me, you know, could you spare 5 minutes just to tell me a little bit more about it? And 90% will say no, but all you need is 1 to say yes. And that gives you the information that you need. So it's worthwhile doing that, especially in this climate. Everyone knows how difficult it is to get experience. And a lot of people are giving up more of their time to help people who are struggling because people have a little bit more time at the moment because they're not commuting. And so it's a good time to kind of catch people who potentially might be able to give you more of their time than they would under normal circumstances.
Great, yeah. So it's, you know, like you said, it's really important to just go back and see what instigated your sort of passion for law. At the same time, you know, there are plenty of opportunities online where you can learn more about how firms operate and their areas of work, and hopefully in the future you can gain more work experience as well. Over to you, Tom. Thanks, Chrissie.
Thank you. No, I think, Chrissie, we were able to catch you thanks to the circumstances that we're in now. So I'm really grateful again for you coming along. So we've got a quick poll again, actually, just tying in with the sector areas. So obviously we've got a choice of 8. We weren't able to do any kind of niche areas such as boxing, unfortunately. But we will open that up now and just see what people's preferences are. Obviously, as we saw earlier, the majority are first years, so it's still very early days. And we'll just see how the results come back on this one. So it might take a few people some time to digest the information. There's quite a few options.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking at something more niche, that would go into other.
Yeah. I'll give them a couple more seconds to complete that. And so it looks like the majority are commercial, which is unsurprising.
Yeah, that's the most popular usually.
Yeah. It's good to see there's someone interested in your expertise, Chrissie.
Well, you don't have to say that because I'm here.
All right, so I think I'll end the poll now and share the results. Yeah, so tying in with that poll then, I've got a question. So obviously You kind of talked about the fact that you came from kind of an unconventional background. So you were homeschooled prior to GCSEs, received underwhelming A-level grades, did a biology undergrad degree with aspirations to become a vet. Do you have any tips then for kind of overcoming imposter syndrome? Because I'm sure it's something you've probably faced in your own career at some stage.
Yeah, all the time. Really, really common amongst not just lawyers, but I think anybody in a competitive professional job where you're surrounded by other very competitive, ambitious people. Inevitably, you suffer with imposter syndrome from time to time, where you feel like you're not cut out for this and everybody's doing better than you, which is, if any of you don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's basically kind of feeling like you're a bit of a fraud in your own life, that you don't really deserve to be there, and that everyone else is doing better than you and is cut out for this life, and you're kind of here by accident and you can't do it and you're worse than everybody else, and what are you doing here? There's probably a more academic definition somewhere, but that's kind of how it feels on a personal level. And I think particularly, yes, with not having great academics and kind of having this unconventional background and not wanting to be a lawyer from day one, which a lot of people do, I definitely wondered whether this was really the right career choice for me. A lot of times, actually. And yes, you're surrounded by real high flyers, particularly in my office. It's the best firm for doing medical law and personal injury in the country. So everybody there is really at the top of their game. But I think, what you've got to remember is that it's a very rigorous selection process. And actually you got through it all and you were selected along with it. It wasn't a mistake, even though a number of times I thought that this was a mistake. Actually they must have meant somebody else. And I did ask the recruiters that on several occasions in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, you sure you meant to send this to me? But yeah, and I think that's what you have to kind of have faith in. You have to go back to that, is that you were chosen for a reason. You do meet the criteria. And actually it's more than okay to feel overwhelmed. At all points in your career. I know people who suffer with imposter syndrome who are running their own firms and doing incredibly well, winning awards all over the place, could not be more on top of their game, and they suffer with imposter syndrome. So I think, you have to know that it's a very common thing in this environment, but actually you've got to revert back to the fact that you got through the process, you got there, and actually you deserve that job. And just as much as anybody else who is there sat around you. And actually people often look like they're coping a lot better than they are. So actually everybody looks like they're cruising through life and doing an amazing job and nothing bothers them, but they're all feeling exactly the same way as you inside. They're just not showing it. So everybody feels the same. There's nobody who's there thinking this is super easy and I can do this, as if it was nothing. They might be sat there looking like that, but actually everybody struggles from time to time. Everybody has bad days. Everybody has days where they just feel like they can't do it. So you're not alone in that respect. So I think you have to have confidence in yourself. And even if you're not yet at the stage where you've been offered the job, I think you've got to look at where you are, look at where you were, and look at where you've come to now. And actually you have got there, even though you may only be in first year. You've got your A-levels and you're studying your first year of uni, and you've got to look at everything that you've achieved. And actually you're not in any worse position than any other first year uni student at the moment, or second year or final year. You're all on an equal footing actually. So you shouldn't feel inferior to anybody else. And also different businesses and different firms are looking for different things as well. So actually, if you feel like your academics aren't as strong as someone else's, there are firms like my firm who actually value your practical skills and your work experience more. So whilst you might think, oh, my academics aren't as great as this person's academics, well, actually, you might be far more highly skilled in another area than that person. Everybody's different. Everybody's got different strengths. So just because you don't appear to be as strong as somebody else in one area doesn't mean that you aren't as strong, and it doesn't mean that you aren't stronger in other areas which are just as valuable. So you can't kind of you shouldn't ever judge yourself by other people, because there's so much in that which messes with your mind. For one, the things aren't always how they appear, and secondly, it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. It's about your journey, about what you're achieving. And you don't need to compare yourself to anybody else, because no one's on your journey apart from you. So I think you just got to trust your gut a little bit and feel that if you don't feel like you're going anywhere if you're trying to achieve something and it's not happening for you, think about whether something you need to change, or whether you need to change and go in a different direction. Maybe it's a different type of law, maybe it's a different type of firm, maybe it's a different type of practice. But just kind of go with what works for you, and don't worry if it doesn't happen for you overnight. It hardly happens for anyone overnight. I mean, I know very few people who've got accepted onto a training contract in their first round of applications. Most people it's second round, a lot of people it's third round. So actually don't be too disheartened if you get rejections, because that's the overwhelming norm. Given the amount of applications that people get, the majority of people are rejected. So don't worry if that happens the first time round. It's likely to, and that shouldn't kind of make you deter from your path in any way. But just, keep going and do what feels right to you. And if you need to change things, don't be afraid to change direction or switch something up if you feel like it's not working for you.
Thank you, Chrissie. So that's some very reassuring advice there for the students. Kevin's got another question for you.
Yeah, so the next question is about the application cycle. So Chrissie, one of the many things you place emphasis on in your YouTube videos is the importance of applying early during the law firm application cycle. So for the viewers here today, could you tell us why it is important to apply early to these firms?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about the number of applications that law firms get. I mean, it's in the most popular law firms get several thousand applications for a handful of places. And in the majority of cases, they're still being reviewed by an individual or a group of individuals. So that's a lot of applications to get through. So a lot of firms, I've never really come across a firm who said that they don't look at the applications until the last day of the closing period. Nearly all firms will start, even if they don't look at them in detail, they'll start kind of sorting them into broad piles of kind of yes, no, maybe, and ones that they'll come back to, even if they don't read them in full detail. So a good reason to get in early is because the earlier you get in, the more likely you are to be put in that yes pile, because once they've read 200, 300 applications, which all look broadly the same, it becomes very difficult to stand out, because actually once you've read hundreds of applications, they all look the same, and you have to work a lot harder to stand out if you're the 500th application than if you're the 5th. So actually, if you can get in early before the recruiters become too jaded, if you like, by having read thousands of applications, that definitely puts you in better stead. It also makes you look organized. It makes you look like you knew when the opening deadlines were, you were prepped in advance, you're not leaving it to the last minute, which is also a good sign for you. You're not kind of submitting it at 11:59 when the deadline's midnight. I would never advise doing that. Because it's very unlikely that you'll be successful if that's the situation that you're in, because you've probably rushed your application. You probably haven't put enough thought into it, if you haven't put enough thought into when you're submitting it. So it is a reflection on you kind of when you submit your application form as well. But definitely the earlier the better. The earlier you get it in, the more likely you are to be put on that yes pile. It's certainly not a guarantee by any means, but it's much easier to go onto the yes pile at an early stage than it is if you're a couple of days before the deadline and they've already allocated all of their yeses by that point. So it's kind of a bit like 6-chair challenge on X Factor. It's kind of like you can get a seat early, but if you come on later, all the seats are full. You then have to oust somebody else out of a seat, which is much harder to do than getting a seat in the first place. So if you can get in early, then you're more likely to get a seat, basically. If that was, I don't know, that's an analogy. I didn't plan that one in advance. It came to me as I was speaking.
Yeah, no, the sooner you get it in, the more likely you will maybe next round of applications. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, the applications for most firms are now open, and it's time for us to send those applications in. Thanks, Chrissie. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin. So we're also interested to know what's been the biggest learning curve in light of your rejected applications in the past. Is there kind of a piece of advice that you would have given yourself if you were making applications now?
Yeah, I think it would be to kind of to stop trying so hard. I think with a lot of applications, I tried to make my answers sound like what I thought they wanted to hear rather than what I actually personally wanted to say. I was kind of very focused on thinking, okay, what sorts of attributes does this firm want me to show? What sorts of stories does this firm want me to talk about? What kind of style does this firm want me to write in? But actually, you know, as going in as a trainee, what firms want to do is train you actually into kind of the lawyers they want you to become. So what they want to see more than anything is potential. They want to see who you are and what your raw ideas are, and actually whether those resonate with their ideas and their values. And if you kind of dress it up too much with trying to make out that you're exactly what they want and you're one of their lawyers already, then sometimes it can be a bit off-putting to them. So I think kind of looking back at my old applications when I used to kind of give it the real hard sell about, because I used to work in sales and kind of talk about how good at selling I was, and, you know, all these things which I thought would kind of, you know, light up their eyes. And actually they didn't really want to hear that particularly. You know, what they really wanted to hear were, you know, what I really thought about, you know, the state of the legal services market and what I thought about this, that, you know, and genuinely what my thoughts were, rather than kind of giving it too much of a hard sell. And I think so many people kind of go in for the buzzwords and kind of say, you know, I am motivated and committed and innovative, and, you know, don't really, and kind of by doing that, you're kind of none of those things in a way, because that's not an original thing to say. So I think just kind of, you know, be yourself actually, because that's what's going to help you to stand out the most, is kind of not using those buzzwords and not trying to kind of try so hard to be everything that they're looking for. I mean, be mindful of what they're looking for and demonstrate that you have those skills within your answers, but don't kind of list the fact that you have them, which is what a lot of people do without really following through. So I think definitely just be yourself as much as you can. Very rarely are questions out to trick you. There are sometimes things that look like trick questions, and you'll spend hours wondering what they want you to say, but actually they don't want you to say anything. They just want to hear what your response is. You know, if the question is, if you were a vegetable, you know, what would you be? They just want to see how your mind works. They just want to see how you answer that question. You know, there's no right vegetable to be in that situation. It's just an exercise in, let's see how this person deals with a curveball. And, you know, can they think on their feet? And, you know, are they engaging? Are they interesting? You know, that sort of thing. So very rarely are application forms really out there to catch you out. They're out there to try and see how your mind works and whether your mind works in a way that it, you know, works for them as an employee. So, you know, be as honest as you can and be yourself as much as you possibly can, while still trying to demonstrate the skills that they're looking for, if that's possible.
Thanks, Chrissie. So we're coming towards the end of our pre-prepared questions. I just want to remind the students in the call today that we should have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions at the end. So don't forget to use the chat feature. Kevin's got another question though for you, Chrissie.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So we've talked a little bit about the application form and how to select the right firm. So the next question is about assessment centers. So it's such a hectic day, a lot of preparation and a lot of exercises, and, you know, the other candidates who are there as well. So how should students effectively prepare for the assessment centers? And do you have any tips for standing out from the crowd?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you should get some idea of what's going to be expected of you on the day. You should get a broad outline, because all assessment centres are different. Actually, some have kind of psychometric tests as a part of it, or some have an interview as a part of it, but they're not all the same. So make sure, tip 1, make sure you read everything really thoroughly in advance, because there will be indications for you about what to expect. And there may also be some pre-reading. If there's a written exercise, they may give you something to read in advance. Also, if they tell you who's going to be interviewing you or who's going to be assessing you at any stage, make sure you give them a Google in advance as well. Find out what areas of practice they work in, because that will kind of help you. Or if there's any, I mean, this is still a lot about psychology in this day and age, even if there's any kind of videos of them online, or you can check out their social media profiles, kind of get a vibe for what these people are like who are going to be interviewing you. That's a really good tip. You know, in this climate, nearly everybody's on social media and they've got a profile, so you can find out a little bit more about the people that are interviewing you. You won't always be told that, because sometimes they don't know in advance. Sometimes it will just be decided on the day. But if they do give you that information, sometimes it's worth asking as well. Sometimes they wouldn't necessarily give it to you voluntarily, but they will tell you if you ask. So it's not a bad idea to ask, and you certainly won't have anything put against your name for asking that kind of question. It's a sensible question to ask and shows that you want to do your research. So it's a good idea just to prep as much as you possibly can in advance. I mean, read your application thoroughly, because often if you have an interview, it will be based on things that you put in your application form. So if you've put, you know, that you speak fluent French, make sure you practice your French the night before, because they may well put you in front of a French speaking partner. That happened to me, not in a law context, but in another job I was applying to. I spoke conversational French, and obviously got interviewed by a French person, and my French wasn't very good. So yeah, just make sure that you read everything on your application form really thoroughly and can very happily talk about it on the spot. Normally they will give you an idea about what sorts of questions they are going to ask you in an interview. They'll say this will be based on your application, or this is going to be largely based on competencies. At IM, they're very big on competency questions. So talk about a time when you've showed leadership skills, or you've worked in a team, or you've dealt with a difficult customer, or you've prioritized different workloads or things like that. So they're really big on like practical skills. So I always advise, if you're applying for IM and you get through to an assessment centre, put together a competency grid, which basically is an outline of all the competencies that you have, a couple of examples of when you demonstrated those, and kind of can formulate that into a sort of situation, task, action, result type answer. And if you can kind of have those in your mind, then it stops you panicking on the day, if you can kind of almost recite those when you get asked those kind of questions. Always Google the firm again on the morning of your assessment day or your interview, because if there's been big news, then you need to know about it. You know, if they've closed an office, or, you know, there's been a merger or something like that, that's the sort of stuff that you need to know about walking into that interview. So always just make sure you check the news of that firm before you go in on the day. Just, I mean, again, practical stuff. If it's an online assessment, just make sure that you can use the software. If you're allowed to set up like a login or something beforehand, do that, just so you're not stressing on the day. Or equally, if you're going to visit an office, make sure you know where that office is in advance. You know what your transport links are like. Get there early rather than late, for sure. You want to make sure you arrive promptly. I think one of the biggest difficulties with assessment centres is having the other people there, because you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. And I'm not sure whether this happens in quite the same way online, because I'm not sure whether you mix with the other candidates quite as much in an online assessment centre as you do in a physical one. But really try not to compare yourself to the other candidates. Particularly often there's a group task associated with an assessment centre. And it can be really hard to think, you know, to stop yourself from thinking, oh, this person's talking more than me, oh, this person's got better ideas than me, and I'm not saying enough. And try not to worry about that too much. Try and just focus on saying some sensible things. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You don't have to have the best ideas in the room. That is a team working exercise, and it's to show that you can work as part of a team. You don't have to lead that team, because not everybody leads the team. There can only be one leader, and you don't have to be that person. So don't worry about other people. You know, this is about you, and the firm will have a set of criteria that you have to meet. And as long as you meet those criteria, you will get through the process. You don't have to kind of beat everyone else. It's not a race. These are the criteria. If you meet them, you will get through. So just focus on that, and try not to focus too much on the other people around you if you've got the opportunity to mix with them. So prepare as much as you can in advance, and try not to get too distracted by other people on the day, I guess, are my two biggest pieces of advice. Brilliant.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of preparation to ace the assessment centres, and it's very important to sort of focus on yourself, because at the end of the day, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Thanks, Chrissie. Over to you, Tom.
Sure. So I promised Chrissie we're coming towards the end now. So yeah, we've got a question here. So for the viewers that aren't aware, you've made a video with Crispin Passmore, who was the former director of policy at the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, or Regulatory Authority. Based on your conversation with him and your existing knowledge, what are your thoughts about the new SQE, or the Solicitors Qualifying Exam, for those students who aren't familiar? And do you think this is better to the LPC? Are there some clear advantages?
Yeah, I mean, that could be an hour seminar in itself. I'll try and condense my thoughts down about the SQE, because I sort of touched on this a bit earlier when I was talking about kind of widening your net in terms of what sorts of businesses you might want to work in. Because under the current system, obviously the traditional route is to do your law degree or non-law degree. If you've done a non-law degree, you would have to convert that into a qualifying law degree by doing the GDL, which is what I did. You would then follow that with your LPC, and then you would do a 2-year training contract, and only certain types of businesses, mainly law firms, are regulated to offer training contracts, and you would then qualify as a solicitor at the end of it. Under the new SQE system, which is due to be implemented next September in 2021, it effectively abolishes the need for a law degree. So you can do any undergraduate degree, and you do not need to do a conversion course in order to convert that to a qualifying law degree. And it also abolishes the LPC. So you can still do a law degree or a conversion course if you want to, but the LPC will actually be abolished altogether after the transition period, which is going to be about 10 years. So it's not mandatory that you do this route, but after the 10-year crossover period, it will be mandatory. So the SQE is going to become ultimately the only way to qualify as a solicitor after the 10-year crossover period. So basically the SQE route, instead of the current route that I've just described, it would be either a law degree or a non-law degree. And you then take your SQE1 and SQE2 exams, combine that with 2 years of qualifying work experience, which does not have to be a training contract within a law firm. It can be a training contract within a law firm, but it doesn't have to be. It can be 2 years of legal work experience. The definition for qualifying work experience is extremely broad. So it does not have to be in a law firm. It can be in any kind of legal capacity, provided there is a solicitor working in that environment who can sign off that you've completed that work experience. And you have to pass your character and suitability test, as you do under the current regime as well. So it opens up the market massively, because at the moment there's this training contract bottleneck because everybody's trying to funnel through this kind of training contract system. And that's why there's so many thousands of applicants for so few places, because only certain businesses, as I said, mainly law firms, are allowed to offer training contracts, which means that there's a lot of people trying to funnel through a few spaces. But under the SQE regime, you don't have to train in a law firm. You don't have to go anywhere near a law firm to qualify as a solicitor. There are many other options to you and many other ways of getting your qualifying work experience. So that does allow for many, many more people to qualify as solicitors than are currently available under the system, which I am pro. I am pro that, because I think there are a lot of people who will be great solicitors who are unable to secure training contracts for a variety of reasons, not that don't include because they're not good enough, because there are a number of steps to go through with the training contract process, and there are a number of people who'd be great but just can't get through that bottleneck. So it opens that up, means that people who haven't been successful in securing a training contract now don't have to. They can go and do their 2 years qualifying work experience wherever they want to. They can take their SQE1, SQE2 exams whenever they feel ready, and then they're qualified. So I like the idea of it opening up the market and providing a different route into the profession outside of the training contract bottleneck. The exams look interesting. So the exams, the SQE1 exam is a multiple choice exam. So it's best answer exam. I think there are 5 possible answers, but all of them could be correct and you have to pick the best one. So that's a big change, is the fact that it's all multiple choice. It's over 2 days. I think it's 180 questions, quite grueling. And the SQE2 exam looks a lot like the LPC. Actually, it's a lot more practical and kind of tests your practical skills. So the exam is very different. You can also do this in any order. So you could do your exams before your qualifying work experience, or you could do your qualifying work experience and then your exams, or you could take one exam, do a year of qualifying work experience and then take the other exam. It doesn't matter. I mean, you could even feasibly do your work experience before you'd even done your degree if you wanted to. The only criteria is that you must do SQE1 before you do SQE2, but the other elements can be done in any order that you want to. And the idea behind this is to create more accessibility to the profession so that people aren't kind of funneling through this training contract route. And it's also to standardize everyone, essentially, because everyone has to pass the SQE1 and SQE2 exams eventually once it's implemented as the sole way to qualify. But that's the ultimate goal, is that will be no other way to qualify other than by passing these 2 sets of exams, because there are other routes at the moment, including SILEX, and there's a couple of other ways you can qualify as well. But once the SQE is formally implemented, nobody will be able to escape doing SQE1 and SQE2. So it completely standardizes the whole process and the quality of solicitor that's being produced, essentially.
Thank you, Chrissie. Yeah, there's no short answer about it, I don't think, but no, you give a very comprehensive review. So thanks for that. If you've got 1 more minute of your time, we did have one submission. So we were just, this pupil in particular was asking about commercial awareness. So something you talk about a lot in your YouTube videos. Do you have any specific sectors students should be kind of looking into, or any particular sources which you found useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think commercial awareness differs depending on what type of firm you're applying to and what type of sector you're applying to, because demonstrating your commercial awareness should always be tailored towards the firm that you're applying to. So different aspects of what's going on. I mean, commercial awareness is essentially understanding what's going on in the world around you and how it applies to that particular business. So actually there will be different world events and developments within the law that apply to different firms. So if you are applying to multiple firms, which I expect you are, I wouldn't necessarily use the same example in all of them. I would really tailor your questions, because, for example, if there's been a development in, costs in civil litigation, then that's going to apply to Irwin Mitchell potentially, but it's not going to apply to a firm that specializes in family law, for example. So I think it's always pick your commercial awareness and tailor it to that firm. So, and commercial awareness can be anything, really. I think a lot of people, because it's commercial awareness, people think, oh, it's got to be stories about the stock market or businesses. And it doesn't have to be. Somebody was asking me about commercial awareness, something to do, how could they talk about COVID in a way that was relevant to applying to a family law firm? And I gave the example of, actually, there was a lot of articles in the news about whether divorce rates were going to go up substantially because of COVID, or whether they were going to go down. And I said, well, you can talk about that. Actually, you can give your opinion on what you think about that, because actually that shows that you're commercially aware, because all that means is that you understand that this is a topic, this is something that's being raised as a result of COVID, and it relates to family law, because clearly if you're a family lawyer, then you are potentially going to be representing some of these people. So it has an impact on your practice if divorce rates go significantly up or significantly down. So the important thing is that you can relate the story that you're choosing to talk about specifically to that law firm, and ideally how it would impact on its profitability, either its clients or its business model or its competitors. You've got to be specific about how it affects that firm and bring in as much information as you can that about that firm to demonstrate that. So yeah, make sure you pick firm specific stories if you're going to do that. In terms of sources, I mean, one of my favorite news sources is Legal Cheek. Does do some tongue-in-cheek stuff, but also actually does put across a lot of the major news that's going on. If you're interested in litigation, there's a website called Litigation Futures, or the Law Society Gazette is another good one, which publishes pretty much everything that's going on in the law. But again, your stories don't have to necessarily be about the law. They can be anything that's going on around the world that impacts that firm. So you don't necessarily have to limit your research to legal publications. If there's something that you think it's in the news that could affect a firm, then you can bring that in as well. It doesn't have to be a law-related story.
Thank you, Chrissie. So I think on that note, we'll wrap up. We really appreciate you giving up your time, because I appreciate it's late in Dubai now. But just before everyone does dash off, I just wanted to mention that a week today, on Tuesday, the 3rd of November, we're actually joined by Eloise Skinner. So I'm sure, Chrissie, you're aware of Eloise. She was at the virtual vacation scheme that Legal Cheek ran. So she'll be treating our members to a yoga session and wellbeing talk. So that's something to look forward to. And then one other thing to add to the calendar, a week tomorrow, Wednesday, 4th of November, we have an SQE talk in partnership with Barbary and the SQE, Barbary and lawcareers.net, sorry. So yeah, I know you gave a very comprehensive overview of the SQE, albeit we had to kind of condense it into 5 minutes, but.
Yeah, they'll talk a lot more about it next week, but it's going to,
yes,
for sure.
Definitely. But thank you very much, Chrissie, for joining us. And thanks to my panelists as well for helping out, my colleagues. And thanks for everyone for joining.
Thank you all. I can just give a plug for my social media handles as well, because I do publish lots of good legal content across all my platforms: YouTube, Law and Broader, Instagram @CWolfe_LAB, the same on Twitter. And I'm also on TikTok @the TikTok Lawyer, but I haven't got a button for that yet. But yeah, I do put legal content across all of those platforms. So keep an eye on them.
I love the background. Maybe that's something the committee members and I might have to adopt for future career sessions. But we also heard you were nominated as Mentor of the Year at the Women in Law Awards. So we wish you all the best. All the
but
best
it hides a multitude of sins, a virtual background, and it makes you all look professional. So,
no, definitely. All right. Thank you very much, Chrissie.
Thanks, guys. Good luck. Thanks for having me.